He had everything money could buy: a powerful business, a lavish lifestyle, and a name that carried weight in boardrooms across the world. Yet, late one night, sitting alone on a wooden bench inside a nearly empty train station, this millionaire was ready to throw it all away. What he didn't know was that a single chance encounter with an exhausted nurse, someone who had no idea who he was, will not only change the course of his life, but hers as well. Nathan Dorian's life had once been the sort of story people admired from a distance. He grew up in privilege, yes, but unlike so many heirs who squandered their advantages, Nathan had turned opportunity into empire. After graduating from an elite business program, he co-founded a technology security company with his college roommate. Within 10 years, it was worth billions. By the time he was in his 30s, Nathan had been profiled in glossy magazines, invited to speak at world conferences, and courted by investors and politicians alike. From the outside, he was the definition of success. His penthouse overlooked the city's skyline. His garage housed rare cars most people would never see outside of museums, and his calendar was filled with dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants and charity galas where the rich mingled with the famous. To his peers, Nathan was untouchable, the golden boy who had it all. But behind the curated image was a man who had been hollowed out. The death of his business partner, Mark Fitzgerald, in a climbing accident had left him rudderless. Mark had been more than a partner. He was Nathan's closest friend, the one who kept him grounded. Without him, the company still functioned, still grew, but the joy of building something together had evaporated. Nathan had kept moving forward, burying himself in work, in appearances, in obligations. But he had begun to feel like a ghost walking through his own life. The wedding had been his chance to stabilize things, or so he thought. His fiancée, Victoria, came from an old money family. Their union had been painted as not just romantic but strategic, a partnership that would strengthen ties between two powerful dynasties. He had convinced himself that with stability at home, maybe the emptiness inside him would shrink. Instead, Victoria never arrived at the altar. The hush of confusion that spread through the church when it became clear she wasn't coming still echoed in Nathan's mind. The guests shifting uncomfortably, the whispers rising, the sympathetic yet curious stares, it was all seared into him. The headlines came fast. Runaway bride leaves billionaire at the altar. For days, his face was plastered across gossip sites, each article dissecting his humiliation. The truth that she had simply decided she couldn't go through with it didn't make it easier. If anything, it made Nathan feel like a fool, a man everyone assumed had power and control, yet who couldn't hold on to the one person who was supposed to stand beside him. In the weeks that followed, Nathan stopped showing up to his office. He ignored phone calls from board members, avoided friends who tried to check in, and withdrew from public life altogether. He spent nights staring out from his penthouse balcony, wondering how a life so full could feel so empty. And then, one late night, he found himself wandering the echoing halls of Grand Central Station. He hadn't planned to go there. He simply drifted, searching for a place where no one would recognize him, no one would demand answers. Surrounded by strangers rushing to trains, he felt invisible. And that invisibility made it easier to consider what he had come to believe was inevitable. Ending it all. Quietly, without spectacle. Just disappearing, the way his happiness already had. He chose a bench tucked against the wall, away from the brightest lights. He sat, folded his hands, and stared at the floor, his mind heavy with the thought that maybe, finally, it was time to stop carrying the weight of his failure. He didn't know it yet, but he wasn't alone. While Nathan sat drowning in silence, another life was rushing in his direction from the opposite end of the station. Elena Morris was used to exhaustion so much, so that she often joked with her colleagues that she couldn't remember what it felt like to not be tired. But tonight was different. Tonight, the weariness pressed down on her bones like lead. Her day had started before sunrise the day before. 12 hours on her feet in the ICU, dealing with everything from cardiac arrests to grieving families, had left her drained. Yet, when her shift ended, she couldn't simply go home and collapse. She hurried back to the small apartment she shared with her younger brother. Tommy cooked him dinner, checked over his college application essays, and only then allowed herself a quick shower before racing to catch the train she was already late for. This was supposed to be her weekend away, first in years. Her best friend from nursing school, Megan, had begged her to take a break. Just 2 days in Atlantic City, nothing extravagant, just a chance to breathe. Elena had agreed reluctantly. But now, rushing through the station with her backpack bouncing against her shoulder, she realized she had missed the last train. The schedule board confirmed it. Her heart sank. She sat on the edge of the marble steps, trying not to cry from frustration. She had been so excited for this one small slice of freedom, and even that had slipped through her fingers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Where are you?" "They're boarding now." Elena typed back quickly. "I'm not going to make it. Go without me." Closing her eyes, she told herself it was fine. She was used to disappointment. Her life had been one sacrifice after another since her parents' accident 2 years earlier. In the blink of an eye, she had gone from carefree 20-something to the sole provider for an 18-year-old boy who was still finishing high school. Everything she did now, every double shift, every overtime hour was for him. Gathering her things, Elena wandered deeper into the station, looking for a quiet spot to rest until she figured out what to do next. That's when she noticed him. At first, she almost walked past. The man sitting on the bench wore a suit that screamed wealth, but his posture didn't match the polished image. His shoulders sagged, his tie hung loose, and his eyes looked as if they had forgotten how to see light. Something about him stopped her. Maybe it was the way he seemed so out of place, as if he had drifted into the wrong life and didn't know how to get back. Maybe it was because, as a nurse, she had learned to recognize despair in people who rarely said it out loud. Whatever it was, Elena's instincts told her this man was not okay. Her exhaustion warred with her compassion. She could have kept walking, told herself it wasn't her problem. But Elena had never been able to ignore someone in pain. With a sigh, she crossed the empty space and lowered herself onto the bench beside him. The man barely turned his head, clearly surprised that anyone would sit next to him. She noticed how tightly his hands were clasped, how still he sat, like someone holding himself together by sheer will. She pulled a granola bar from her bag, tore it in half, and held out a piece. "You look like you need this more than I do." The stranger blinked, as if no one had spoken to him in days. And just like that, the silence broke. For Nathan, the granola bar was an absurd gesture. Here he was, a man who owned a fleet of cars, had a staff at his beck and call, and access to the finest meals anywhere in the world, and yet, at that moment, no gift had ever felt more disarming. He accepted it without thinking, the small piece of sweetness crumbling in his hand. For the first few minutes, he didn't speak. He wasn't sure how. He had spent weeks avoiding conversation, shutting himself away, convinced that no one wanted to hear the raw truth of how badly he was unraveling. But this stranger's presence, her quiet calm, her lack of judgment pressed against the walls he had built around himself. It started with small talk. Elena, too polite to sit in silence, but too tired to interrogate, simply asked, "Long day?" Nathan gave a hollow laugh. "Long life." Something in his tone made her pause. She didn't know what he meant, but she recognized the heaviness behind it. She had heard it before in families in hospital waiting rooms, in patients who had given up hope. So she said the only thing she could think of. Sometimes talking helps. It was such a simple invitation, and yet it cracked something open inside him. The words poured out not in a polished speech, not in the careful way he usually presented himself, but raw, broken fragments. He talked about pressure, about expectations, about how nothing he had built seemed to matter anymore. He didn't mention money or headlines. He spoke instead about emptiness, about watching the world applaud his achievements while feeling more invisible than ever. Elena listened. Really listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't pepper him with questions, didn't look at him like a puzzle to be solved. She just let him speak, nodding occasionally, her tired eyes steady on his face. When he paused, she shared pieces of her own story. About losing her parents in the accident, about the way she had been thrust into a role she never asked for, mother, guardian, provider. About the nights she came home from the hospital so tired she could barely stand, only to help her brother with homework before collapsing for 2 hours of sleep. It was strange the way two strangers in a train station could connect so quickly. But that's what happens when both people are stripped bare of pretenses. Nathan wasn't a billionaire in that moment, and Elena wasn't a nurse trying to hold her life together. They were just two people carrying too much. The station around them grew quieter. The last announcements echoed through the hall. The click of janitor's brooms swept through the marble floors, and still they sat. For the first time in weeks, Nathan felt like someone was looking at him, not the name, not the fortune, not the scandal in the papers, but him. By the time his voice finally trailed off, the crushing urge to end his life had loosened. He didn't know why exactly. Maybe it was because she didn't pity him. Maybe it was because she didn't try to offer solutions. She simply reminded him, by her presence, that people could still care without wanting anything in return. And that was something Nathan hadn't felt in a long, long time. When midnight struck, the lights in the station dimmed further. A security guard strolled past, glancing at them but saying nothing. Elena shifted, realizing she had been sitting for longer than she'd intended. Her eyelids burned with fatigue, her shift still lingering in her body, but she hesitated to stand. She looked at the man beside her, still nameless, still a stranger, and sensed how fragile he was. She had seen that same fragility and patience just before a breaking point, when one more bad moment could tip them over the edge. But she had also seen how even the smallest gesture of compassion could tether someone back. She touched his arm lightly. "You'll be okay," she said, her voice soft but certain. It wasn't a question. It was a promise, one she hoped he would carry with him. Nathan swallowed hard. He wanted to ask her name, her number, anything to keep her from fading back into the blur of the world. For the first time in weeks, he wanted something, not money, not power, not recognition, but this, a lifeline. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice almost pleading. Elena hesitated. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the instinct nurses carry, that knowledge of when to stay and when to let go. She smiled faintly, shook her head, and whispered, "It doesn't matter." Before he could protest, she stood. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floor as she slung her bag over her shoulder. She gave him one last look, a look full of quiet strength, and then walked away. Nathan sat frozen. His chest ached, his throat tight with words unsaid. He had been ready to vanish, ready to erase himself from existence, and instead a stranger had handed him back the thread of his own life, then disappeared without a name. For a long while, he didn't move. The echo of her footsteps faded into the cavernous station until there was only silence. But inside him, something had shifted. When he finally stood to leave, Nathan knew this night was not the end he had planned. It was the beginning of something else. He just didn't know what yet. What he did know was this: he had to find her again. Nathan left Grand Central that night feeling like a man who had survived a storm only to be washed up on an unfamiliar shore. The cold night air stung his face as he stepped outside, his driver rushing forward in relief. But Nathan barely heard him. His mind replayed every moment of that bench conversation at the granola bar, her tired smile, the weight in her eyes when she said she understood responsibility. He had built his life on control. Deals, negotiations, investments, all numbers and contracts he could bend to his will. But this woman, this nurse with no last train home, had unraveled him with nothing more than kindness. When Nathan slid into the backseat of the car, the leather felt foreign. For years, he had used these rides as mobile offices, phones buzzing with deals, assistants waiting on his every word. Tonight, he sat in silence, staring out at the glowing windows of the city he supposedly owned. The wealth, the power, the empire all seemed ridiculous. None of it had been able to stop him from sinking, and none of it could bring her back. At home, he ignored the dozens of calls from his brother, his PR team, and even his fiancée's family demanding explanations. He poured himself a drink, but even that burned wrong. For the first time in his life, Nathan felt something money couldn't buy: helplessness. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she worked. He only knew she was a nurse, tired and kind, who had given him just enough hope to last until morning. He should have asked. He should have demanded her name. But she had walked away, and Nathan Dorian, a man who could summon anyone with a phone call, realized there was one person in the city who was truly beyond his reach. That realization haunted him. For 3 days, he drifted through meetings and headlines, his life dissected by the press, who gleefully reported every humiliation of his broken engagement. But beneath the noise was Silence's silence of not knowing if he would ever see her again. And in that silence, a decision began to take shape. If fate had been cruel enough to bring her into his life for only one night, then he would be bold enough to defy fate itself. He would find her. On the 3rd day after Grand Central, Lee, because that was her name, though Nathan didn't know it, yet was bent over Mrs. Gonzalez's wheelchair, helping the older woman with her physical therapy. It was an ordinary day at Meadowbrook Nursing Home. The beeping of heart monitors, the steady shuffle of nurses, the faint smell of antiseptic mixed with laundry detergent. Leah had convinced herself the man in the tuxedo was already gone from her mind. She had told herself he was just another wealthy stranger who had passed through her life for one night. But late at night, when Gatsby the cat purred on her lap, she found herself remembering his voice, the raw honesty in it, the way he had said, "Thank you for seeing me." So when Tina from reception appeared at the door with her eyes wide and voice bubbling with excitement, Leah thought something must be wrong. "Leah, you'd better come to the front desk," Tina whispered. Leah excused herself and walked quickly down the hall. What she saw made her stop cold. The entire reception counter was buried beneath flower-knot stiff roses, not corporate lilies, but wild blooms, hand-picked in soft colors that looked like a meadow had been transplanted into the nursing home. Her first thought was, "This can't be for me." But then Tina handed her a card. A small, white envelope with her name written in careful, elegant handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside, the words were simple. "Thank you for sharing your bench and your kindness when I needed it most. If you ever want to continue our conversation, my number is below. No pressure, just gratitude. Nathan." Heat rushed to Leah's cheeks. She tucked the card away quickly, aware of the curious eyes of the staff around her. "Just a friend," she muttered when Martha asked who had sent them. But inside, her heart thundered. For 3 days, she had wondered if he was okay. Now, here was her answering it just okay, but reaching for her across the impossible gap between their worlds. That night, she sat on her worn couch, staring at his number. Gatsby circled her legs impatiently until she finally fed him, muttering, "Well, should I call him?" The cat meowed once and flicked his tail, which Leah took as no answer at all. She picked up her phone, hesitated, and finally sent a single line. "The flowers are beautiful. Thank you." The reply came almost immediately. "You're welcome. I hope they brightened your day the way our conversation brightened mine." Leah smiled despite herself. She typed back, "I put them in the break room so everyone could enjoy them." His response was fast, warm, and achingly sincere. That's exactly what I would have expected from Yushering the Beauty. And just like that, she realized the stranger from the train station wasn't gone at all. 3 mornings after the flowers arrived, the phone on the administrator's desk at Meadowbrook Nursing Home rang with a call no one expected. On the line was a representative from the Dorian Foundation asking detailed questions about programs, resident needs, and one proposal in particular that had been sitting in a drawer for months because the money never came through: art therapy. The caller referenced patient outcomes, supply lists, staffing hours, and even asked for square footage of a room that might be repurposed. It was the kind of conversation administrators dream about and rarely get. Minutes later, Leah was called into the office. She walked in bracing for a scheduling dispute or a charting question. Instead, She found the administrator holding a notepad covered with numbers and a smile that didn't fit any problem Leah had seen in her 12 years on the unit. The message was simple and staggering. A private donor wanted to fund the full art therapy program Leah had designed, plus upgrades to the activity space, for 3 years. The donor had specifically mentioned Leah's dedication. The paperwork would move fast. The money, they said, was already in motion. Outside that office, Leah's pulse raced. She thought about paint under the fingernails of residents who could no longer find words but could still find color. She thought about the quiet that falls over a room when a brush touches paper and agitation gives way to focus. She thought about Mr. Wilson, the retired art teacher who never stopped critiquing imaginary gallery shows from his wheelchair. And then, inevitably, she thought about the bench, the tuxedo, and the stranger who listened. Her phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen. It was from the number on the card. He wrote that he hoped she wouldn't mind a visit to talk through details with the staff, that he'd like to see the facility for himself. He added one line that did more than any corporate promise could. No press. No fanfare. This is about your patients. Leah weighed every reason to keep her distance and all the reasons not to penalize her residents for a moment of fate. She typed back that she would give the tour. He arrived late morning in clothes that read as everyday, but clearly weren't off the rack. No entourage. No cameras, just a driver waiting discreetly outside. When he stepped through the doors, the hush that follows a rumor passing down a hallway almost sparkled. Leah met him in the lobby and saw at once the difference between the man on a hard station bench and the man standing under fluorescent ceiling tiles. He looked steady, tired at the edges, but present. He said her name for the first time, as if the syllables answered a question that had been gnawing at him since the night they met. He introduced himself properly, too. Nathan. No last name offered. None needed. They walked. Leah did what she always does when she's nervous, pointed out the details. The handrails installed last winter. The afternoon schedule taped to a corkboard for residents who like to know what's next. The activity closet with carefully labeled bins that never seemed full enough. In the cramped room that would become the studio, she laid out the plan she had designed on her kitchen table. Adjustable easels for wheelchairs, a sink deep enough for easy cleanup, locked drawers for sharps, shelves for watercolors and air-dry clays. She didn't try to sell him. She just told the truth about what art does for people whose memories are disappearing and for those who love them. Nathan didn't rush. He asked questions that showed he was listening, about staffing ratios, about how to measure success when success isn't a number, about which residents might benefit first. Down a quiet hallway, Leah stopped at a display of paintings kind families leave behind when they pack up room sand, pointed to a landscape that looked like late afternoon in Puerto Rico. Mrs. Gonzalez, she explained, rarely speaks, but when she paints, places come back to her. Nathan stepped closer. He noticed the brushwork around a window, the careful line where a fence meets a road, the way color warms near a doorway. He said his mother had taught him to look for the feeling behind the picture. It was the first personal detail Head offered. Not a brand, not an asset. A mother who painted. They kept moving through the unit, and the residents met him the way they meet anyone new, directly, curiously, without pretense. Mr. Wilson rolled up and, with a mischievous grin, asked if this was Leah's boyfriend. Leah flushed. Nathan laughed and said he was a friend who admired good art and good people. Mr. Wilson nodded, satisfied, and told Nathan to come back when the paints arrive, because critiques would be conducted every Friday at 2. By the time they circled back to reception, the conversation with the administrator had turned from possibility to timelines. Orders to place. Contractors to call. Nathan thanked the staff, not with a speech, but with the kind of eye contact and gratitude that reads as genuine even in a building where people learn to be cautious about promises. Then he turned to Leah and asked if she had time for lunch. Not a reservation at a place with a waiting list. Just a diner around the corner that served the kind of sandwiches you eat with both hands. She checked the clock, checked her gut, and said yes. It was only an hour. But as they stepped into the sunlight, she understood that nothing about this was ordinary. The diner had red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and the particular smell of coffee that's been refilled all morning. The waitress greeted Nathan by name and asked about a college kid's grades as if this were a small town instead of a city that forgets people as fast as it makes them. For Leah, that detail mattered. It meant there were places where he wasn't a headline. He was just a regular who liked a tuna melt. They slid into a corner booth. Nathan ordered without looking at a menu and deferred to Leah when the waitress asked if they wanted dessert up front because the pies go fast. Once the practicalities were handled, the conversation went where it had avoided going at the nursing home toward who they were when nobody was watching. Leah told him, carefully and plainly, that her life was modest by choice and by circumstance. She had been divorced for years. No children. A mortgage that always felt a little too large for one salary. A cat named Gatsby who considered himself a roommate rather than a pet. She said she wasn't fragile, just tired sometimes, and that she had learned to measure a day by small wins. A calm afternoon for a restless resident. A phone call from her brother that ended with a joke instead of a sigh. Nathan didn't counter with accomplishments. He admitted to a script he'd followed so long it felt like truth deals, dinners, a relationship that made sense on paper and nowhere else. He said that what had shaken him at the station wasn't the humiliation of being left. It was the realization that he'd been living a life that didn't belong to him. The relief he felt that night when the wedding didn't happen scared him almost as much as the despair that followed. There is a rhythm to honest conversation that makes time slippery. They ate. They talked. They stopped to drink water and regroup when the subject pressed too close to the bone. At one point, Nathan fell quiet and just looked at Leah, at the way she held her fork in her left hand, at the way she glanced toward the window between thoughts as if to steady herself, at the way her eyes didn't dart away from hard topics. "When you look at me," he asked, "what do you see?" Leah answered without embroidery. "Someone who's listening."